The hall was big enough to swallow a small city. That was the first thing every human delegate noticed when they walked into the Galactic Conclave for the first time. The ceiling went up so far that the upper galleries disappeared into a soft blue haze. The seats curved in great rings around a central floor, and every seat held something that breathed or at least moved in a way that suggested breathing. Some of them had eyes. Some of them had things that were not eyes, but served the same purpose. All of them were watching the central floor. Ambassador Yara Ose had stopped noticing the ceiling 2 years ago. She sat at the human delegation table, a long, flat surface of dark composite material, 8 chairs, 8 data pads, 8 small flags that the Conclave Protocol Office insisted on, despite nobody asking for them. The flags were the size of a paperback book. They looked ridiculous. She had stopped mentioning this. The Veth Dominion speaker was still talking. He had been talking for 6 hours. His name, or the closest thing the translation matrix could produce, was something that sounded like a door hinge and then a question mark. The human delegation had taken to calling him Gerald among themselves. Gerald had 6 limbs and a speaking voice that came from somewhere in his middle section rather than his face, and he was currently using all of that voice to explain, in careful, patient, deeply condescending detail, why humanity's proposed amendment to the Outer Corridor Trade Agreement was not just wrong, but was in fact so wrong that the Veth Dominion was struggling to understand how a species capable of interstellar travel had managed to produce it. The translation matrix lagged 2 beats behind Gerald's actual words. This meant the insult arrived twice. Once in Veth tongue, which sounded like furniture being dragged. Once in English, which made it worse. Yara wrote something on her datapad. Crossed it out. Wrote it again. Crossed it out again. Across the table, her deputy, a man named Marcus, who had the particular energy of someone counting down the days to his pension, passed her a note, the old-fashioned way. Paper. Folded once. Year 11, it said. Day, 412 of active sessions. Gerald is on slide 73. There are 109 slides. She looked at the note. Looked at Marcus. Looked at Gerald, who was now gesturing with the upper 4 of his 6 limbs, in a way that the translation matrix described as times, illustrative emphasis, times, and that looked, to human eyes, like a man trying to escape a particularly aggressive jacket. She folded the note. Set it down. Picked up her stylus. Capped it. Set it on top of her closed datapad. The small sound it made click was nothing. A nothing sound. The sound of a pen being set down. Marcus looked at the stylus. Looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. She pushed her chair back from the table. The chair made a sound. Not a dramatic sound. The sound of a chair being pushed back from a table in a way that suggests the person pushing it back is done with the table, the room, and most of what had been said in it for the last 11 years. She stood up. Gerald kept talking. The translation matrix kept lagging. She picked up her datapad, her stylus, the small ridiculous flag. She tucked the flag under her arm, because leaving it felt like a statement, and she was done making statements. Statements required the other side to be listening. She walked toward the door. The other 7 human delegates did not look at each other. They did not exchange signals or nods or any of the silent communication that the Conclave's security analysts would later spend 3 weeks trying to identify in the surveillance footage. They simply stood up, one by one, 2 seconds apart, like they were getting off a bus. They picked up their things. They followed her. Gerald stopped talking. The translation matrix caught up. The words hung in the air times. Therefore, the Veth Dominion maintains that the proposed amendment represents a fundamental misunderstanding of times, and then the words just stopped, because the words had nothing left to do a translate. The silence was a different size than the room. Yara reached the door. The door required a palm scan to open. She pressed her palm to the panel. The panel beeped. The door opened. She did not look back. She did not look back, because there was nothing behind her worth turning around for. Not the hall, not the rings of watching eyes and not eyes, not Gerald standing frozen with 4 limbs raised, not the grand facilitator of the Seer Collective, who had half risen from his seat in the outer ring and was making a small, urgent gesture that might have been a question or might have been a warning. The door closed. In the hallway, Yara walked. Her team walked behind her. Their footsteps were the only sound in a corridor built to accommodate species with anywhere between 2 and 12 limbs, and the sound was very small in all that space. Marcus fell into step beside her. He did not ask if she was sure. He did not ask what came next. He had worked alongside her for 9 years, and he understood, in the specific way that long service teaches you to understand things, that some decisions are not decisions at the moment they are made. They are the last step of a very long walk that started years ago. The moment is just where the foot finally lands. They reached the transit bay. The shuttle was already prepped. She had prepped it that morning, which Marcus had noticed and not mentioned. She sat in the front seat, looked out the window at the station's exterior dock, at the stars beyond it, very far away, not caring about trade corridors. Marcus sat behind her and was quiet. The shuttle began to move. Behind them, in the conclave hall, the session had been running for 11 hours. 3 years of amendments, counter-proposals, working groups, subcommittees, preliminary talks, about preliminary talks, 109 slides, 6 limbs, going in every direction. Humanity had been listening for 11 years. The conclave had been talking for 11 hours. The shuttle cleared the dock. The stars did not move. Nobody moved the chair. That was the first thing the junior conclave archivist noticed on the morning after the walkout. She was Heron, small, gray-feathered, with the particular nervous energy of someone who had chosen a career in paperwork, specifically to avoid situations like this one, and her route to her station took her past the human delegation table every single morning. The table was still there. 8 chairs, 8 data pads, closed, stacked neatly. 8 small flags. Empty. She took the long way around to her station. She told herself it was because of the floor cleaning equipment parked near the main aisle. She told herself this for 2 weeks before she stopped pretending. The emergency session convened 36 hours after the walkout. The Veth Dominion's Gerald addressed the hall for 4 hours. He used the word times, unprecedented times, 47 times. He used the phrase times, grievous disruption, times, 19 times. He used the phrase times human delegation's emotional instability, times 7 times, which caused the translation matrix to work very hard and produce an output that was technically accurate and deeply undiplomatic. The seer elder, whose name was Counselor Vale, and who had been attending conclave sessions since before most of the currently represented species had developed radio, said nothing. He watched. His 4 hands rested on the table in front of him. He watched the way a very old, very patient thing watches a fire with interest, with distance, and with the specific knowledge of someone who has seen enough fires to know exactly how they end. Nobody from the human delegation attended the emergency session. Nobody from the human delegation responded to the formal summons that followed. Nobody from the human delegation responded to the informal request that followed the formal summons. Nobody responded to the 17 messages the Veth speaker drafted over the following 2 weeks and sent to Yara Osei's official conclave communications channel. 14 of those messages were formal. 2 were semi-formal. 1, the last one, drafted at what the Veth home system clock recorded as 3 in the morning, was neither of these things. It was short. It said, "Ambassador Osei, we would like to continue the discussion." The auto-reply said, "Ambassador Osei is currently unavailable. For urgent conclave matters, please contact the office of the Grand Facilitator." Gerald stared at the auto-reply for a long time. He sent the message again. The auto-reply said the same thing. 3 weeks after the walkout, the outer corridor stopped moving. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It stopped the way machinery stops when someone quietly removes a small but essential part and doesn't tell anyone which part they removed. A supply transfer from the Heron Outer Territories to the Veth Dominion's 3rd processing station arrived 6 days late because the routing calculation that the transfer ships used had been maintained by a human logistics company that had, 3 weeks ago, ceased operations in the corridor without filing any formal notice with anyone. The Veth Dominion filed a complaint with the Conclave's Trade Oversight Body. The Trade Oversight Body looked at the filing, looked at the logistics records, sent a formal inquiry to the human logistics company's registered Conclave contact. The auto-reply said, "This contact is no longer active. Please direct inquiries to Earth's diplomatic representation at the Galactic Conclave." The Earth's diplomatic representation at the Galactic Conclave did not have anyone in it at the moment. The Trade Oversight Body sat with this information for a while. Then they sent a note to the Veth Dominion saying the matter was under review. The Veth Dominion asked how long the review would take. The Trade Oversight Body said they were not able to provide an estimate at this time. Gerald used the phrase, "times grievous disruption, times twice more." The Heron-Seer border was the next thing. It had been quiet for 40 years. Quiet in the specific way that a room is quiet, when two people inside it have decided not to speak, rather than because they have nothing to say. The arbitration framework that kept it quiet was a human design built during humanity's 5th year at the Conclave. One of the few things the full body had agreed was good work, without needing to argue about it for 3 years first. The framework required a human-staffed monitoring office on the neutral station between the two territories. The monitoring office had been dark for 4 weeks. Nobody had been assigned to replace it. This was because the assignment would have required Conclave authorization, and Conclave authorization required the relevant working group to convene, and the relevant working group had 2 standing human delegates on it, whose seats were currently empty. A Heron patrol vessel crossed a disputed survey point on a Tuesday. A Seer response vessel was dispatched on Wednesday. On Thursday, Councillor Vial filed the first formal alert the Seer Collective had filed in 11 years. His language was measured. His 4 hands, according to the session recording, were completely still on the table in front of him. Still in the way that said he had been watching this particular fire coming for a while. The archivist filed a supply request on day 34. It was a routine request, the kind of thing that went through automatically on a normal week. She needed the human delegation's coffee service restocked protocol, required all delegation supply stations to be maintained, regardless of attendance status. In case of return, she submitted the form through the standard system. The system flagged it for authorization. Authorization required sign-off from the human delegation's supply coordinator. The human delegation's supply coordinator was not available. The form sat in the system. Open. Pending. A small orange flag in the corner that meant times awaiting action. She checked it every morning when she arrived. After the first week, she stopped checking it because checking it had started to feel like something she couldn't name precisely and didn't want to. She still walked the long way around the human delegation table. The chair was still there. It had started to bother her in a way that was completely disproportionate to a chair, and she was self-aware enough to know this, and knowing it did not help at all. She filed the supply request again on day 34, under a different routing, hoping the system would process it a different way. Request pending. Awaiting authorization from human delegation lead. She stared at the screen. Somewhere in the outer corridor, a Heron patrol vessel was sitting 90 kilometers from a Seer response vessel, and both of them were waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. The coffee request sat open. Nobody came. It was raining in London. Yara had asked for London specifically. The debriefing office had offered Geneva first, then Singapore, then a facility in Nairobi that apparently had very good views. She had said London. They had not asked why. People who worked in diplomatic services long enough learned not to ask why someone wanted rain. The building they put her in was a narrow, converted townhouse, in a part of the city that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. The street outside had a launderette on one end and a wine bar on the other, and nothing in between, except wet pavement and a cat that appeared to live on the front step of the building next door and had absolutely no interest in galactic politics. She liked the cat. She had been in London for 6 days. She had attended 2 debriefing sessions, which were technically called Times Transition Consultations, times in the official paperwork, and were, in practical terms, 2 rooms full of people who wanted to know exactly what she thought she was doing. She had told them, both times, in plain language, with no diplomatic scaffolding. They had made notes. They had exchanged looks. One of them had said the phrase, times considerable implications, times 4 times in 20 minutes, without appearing to notice he was doing it. She had said, "Right. Is there anything else?" There was not anything else. On the 7th morning, she walked to the place near Waterloo. It had been there since 1987, according to the sign above the door, which was handwritten in the particular style of someone who had written it decades ago and saw no reason to update it. The menu was 4 items long. The counter was staffed by a man who had the face of someone who had heard everything and found most of it mildly interesting at best. She ordered the meat pie. She sat at a small table by the window and ate the meat pie and watched the rain do what rain does, which is fall. It fell on the street. It fell on the people walking past with their heads down. It fell on a delivery vehicle that was parked half on the pavement in a way that suggested the driver was not overly concerned about the opinions of other road users. The pie was very good. It tasted like a place that had been making the same thing for a long time and had stopped worrying about it. She was halfway through when her datapad chimed. She looked at it. She finished another bite of the pie. Looked again. The message was not from Earth's diplomatic office. It was not from the Conclave's formal communications channel. It was not from any of the 8 different working groups she was technically still listed as a member of, despite the fact that she had not attended any of them in 6 weeks. It was from Councillor Vale. Personal address. His own communications ID, not the Seer Collective's official channel. The message was 11 words long. Ambassador Osei. We would very much appreciate a conversation. At your convenience. She read it. Set the datapad face down on the table. Ate more of the pie. Pick the datapad up. Read it again. At your convenience time, she turned the phrase over in her mind, the way you turn over something small and strange that you found in the street. Not quite sure what it is. Fairly sure it means something. In 11 years at the Galactic Conclave, no one had ever put those 3 words in a communication directed at a human delegate. Convenience was not a concept that the Conclave applied to humanity. Humanity was expected to be available, prepared, and seated by the time the session began. Humanity's convenience was approximately as relevant to Conclave scheduling as the convenience of the furniture. At your convenience. She finished the pie. Asked the counterman for a tea. Sat with the tea. Outside, the rain kept going. The delivery vehicle was still on the pavement. A woman walked past with an umbrella that was losing a structural argument with the wind. Marcus arrived at 10:30. He had found the place by the simple method of asking her where she was, which she had answered, and he had taken the tube from the office where he had been doing what he described as Times administrative continuity, Times, and what she suspected was mainly waiting to see what she decided. He sat across from her, looked at the empty pie plate, ordered a tea of his own. She slid the datapad across the table. He read the message, read it again. Set the datapad down, with the particular care of someone handling information they are still processing. Vale, he said. Vale. She confirmed. Not the Veth. Not the Veth. He picked up his tea. Did not drink it immediately. What do you want to do? She looked out the window. The woman with the losing umbrella had given up and was now walking without it, hood up, moving with the energy of someone who had made their peace with being wet. I'll think about it, Yara said. Marcus nodded. Drank his tea. She did not say it like a woman who was thinking about it. She said it the way she said most things, flat and clean, with the same weight whether she was ordering pie or walking out of an 11-year negotiation. But Marcus had worked beside her long enough to know the difference between times I will think about it, times and times I have already decided, and I am currently deciding whether the decision is enough on its own. This was the second one. He did not push. Outside, the rain found a rhythm. Not heavier, not lighter, just consistent. The way rain gets when it has fully committed to an afternoon. She picked up her tea, put it down without drinking. The message was still on the datapad. 11 words. 3 of them doing all the work. She thought about the conclave hall. The ceiling that disappeared into blue haze. The rings of seats. The empty table. The small orange flag on a supply request that nobody had authorization to close. She thought about Vial's 4 hands, resting still on the table in front of him while the hall went sideways. At your convenience. She knew what she was going to do. She had probably known when she asked for London, which is what London is for giving you enough gray sky and good pastry to get still enough to hear the thing you already know. She did not say any of this to Marcus. "Finish your tea," she said. He finished his tea. They left. She arrived on a freight transfer, not a diplomatic shuttle, not a designated delegation vessel with the small flag on the side, and the conclave arrival protocols, and the greeting party in the bay. A freight transfer. A mid-sized cargo hauler running a standard resupply run to the station's outer ring, which she had booked under her name without any modification or cover, because she saw no reason to pretend she was someone else. And also, the freight company had a very reasonable rate. Marcus had suggested a more formal approach. She had said the word times, no times, in the tone that meant the conversation was finished. The hauler docked at Bay 17, which was a working bay crates, mechanical arms, station crew in gray jumpsuits, running pre-unload checks, the smell of engine coolant and recycled air that every freight bay, in every station, in every system, smelled like, because some things were universal. She walked down the ramp with her bag over one shoulder. Gerald was standing at the bottom, all 6 limbs very still. She had never seen all 6 of Gerald's limbs still at the same time before. In session he was always moving, illustrating, emphasizing, gesturing in ways that the translation matrix gamely tried to assign meaning to. 6 limbs in motion was Gerald's natural state. 6 limbs still was something different. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp. Looked at him. He was large up close. She had always been across a table from him before, and the distance had made him seem approximately human proportioned, which he was not. He was roughly the size of a vending machine, and the same general shape as a question that had not been answered yet. "Ambassador Osei," he said. The words came from his middle section. Even knowing this, it still required a small mental adjustment every time. "Gerald," she said. A pause. Gerald's translation matrix processed this. "That is not my name," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She walked past him toward the bay exit. He fell into step beside her, 6 limbs readjusting into something that was not quite walking but covered ground. The meeting room Vielle had arranged was not a conclave room. It was a small space in the station's administrative wing round table, 4 chairs designed for human physiology, a window that looked out at the station's exterior, and therefore at a great deal of nothing, which was appropriate. A tray of water had been placed on the table. Also, a coffee. She looked at the coffee. The archivist, Vielle said, from the chair across from her, was very pleased to finally have the request resolved. She looked at him. His 4 hands were on the table. He was watching her with the specific quality of attention of something very old that has learned to notice small things, because the small things are usually where the real information lives. She sat down, picked up the coffee, drank. Gerald arranged himself in a way that was not quite sitting but indicated he was staying. Vielle began to speak. Formally at first, the prepared language, the conclave register, the careful architecture of words that meant things without quite promising anything. He was very good at it. Most species with any political tradition were good at it. It was the linguistic equivalent of moving around a room without touching anything. She let him finish. "Right," she said. "Now tell me what you actually want." The room was quiet. Gerald's translation matrix hummed. Vale's 4 hands stayed still. "The Heron Seer situation is deteriorating," Vale said, in a different register. Plainer. The way he probably spoke when he was not in session. "The monitoring absence has allowed survey disputes to become patrol disputes. Patrol disputes have a known trajectory." "Yes," she said. "The outer corridor logistics framework is operating at 30% of prior capacity. 3 Veth supply chains have been rerouted at significant cost. 2 Heron outer settlements are reporting delivery delays in medical supplies." "Yes," she said again. "The conclave," Vielle continued, "requires human participation to function at an acceptable level. This is..." He paused, as if choosing the next word required physical effort. "Not something that was adequately understood before your delegation's departure." She set her coffee down. "It was understood by us," she said. The word sat on the table between them, not angry. Just there. The way a fact is. Just there. Gerald made a sound. The translation matrix identified it as time's acknowledgement. His limbs moved very slightly. Yes, Vale said. It was understood by you. She looked at him for a moment. Then at Gerald. Then back at Vale. Why didn't you listen? She asked. Not what do you want now. Before. 3 years ago. 5 years ago. We submitted 18 formal requests for procedural reform. 15 working group proposals. 2 comprehensive frameworks for restructuring how the outer corridor arbitration operated. We sat through Gerald's slides. Gerald's translation matrix processed his name in this context. All 109 of them, she added. More quiet. We did not believe, Gerald said finally, that your absence would have weight. She looked at him. We assessed human participation as present, as given, as a condition that required no maintenance because it had always been there. His middle limbs shifted. We were incorrect. 3 words. We were incorrect. From a Veth Dominion speaker who had used 6 hours of slides to explain why humanity was the one that had been incorrect. She did not say anything for a moment. The window showed stars. The stars showed nothing back. What are you offering? She asked. This was the part Vale had prepared for. He had a document. Actual reform proposals. Structural. With specific timelines and accountability measures. Not the usual language that looked like commitment, and was actually a very detailed description of the door being left open. Real things. She could see they were real things, because they were uncomfortable in places, which is what real proposals feel like. She read. Asked questions. Vale answered. Gerald answered when addressed. His translation matrix, she noticed, was running faster now, not lagging. Either the hardware had been upgraded, or he was speaking more carefully. She asked about enforcement. Vale answered. She asked about the Heron Seer monitoring station, specifically who would staff it and how fast. Vale answered with a number of days that was faster than she had expected. She asked about the working groups. Restructured, Vale said. Human delegation co-chairs 3 standing committees. Not advisory. Voting. She looked at him. Co-chairs, she said. Co-chairs, he confirmed. She put the document down. Looked at the window. Outside the station, the nothing was very large and very patient. I'll need 2 days, she said. To review with my team. Of course, Vale said. And Gerald needs to retire the slides, she added. Gerald's translation matrix processed this. That is, he said, a reasonable request. The session was called for the 3rd morning. No announcement explained why it was being called. The session notice simply appeared in the conclave's scheduling system, the way session notices always appeared. A date, a time, a room designation, a listed agenda that was technically accurate and told you almost nothing about what was actually happening. The conclave had been doing this for 300 years and was very good at it. The delegations filed in. Some of them were early. The Seer delegation arrived first. As they always did, Counselor Vale's habit of arriving before the room was full went back far enough that the station staff had started calibrating the lighting settings to his schedule, rather than the official start time. He sat, 4 hands on the table, and watched the room fill. The Veth arrived in a group. Gerald walked to his usual seat. He did not look at the human delegation table. He sat. He placed his materials in front of him. He did not reach for the presentation controls. The Heron arrived. The junior archivist, who was not a delegate but whose duties brought her into the hall before sessions, was doing something at the data terminal near the outer wall. She looked up when the Heron entered. Looked at the human delegation table. Looked back at her screen. The table was still empty. The session time arrived. The Grand Facilitator, a Seer elder, even older than Vale, who had been Grand Facilitating since before anyone currently seated, had taken their first diplomatic posting, called the session to order. The room went to its specific kind of quiet, the kind that holds still and waits. The side door opened, not the main entrance. The side door. The small one that conclave members used when they arrived late, or were trying not to make a production of arriving. which was typically used by junior staffers and delegates who had overslept and did not want this noted in the record. Yara Osei came through it. Her team followed. 8 of them, 7 originals, plus 1 new face, a young woman named Desta, who had been assigned from the diplomatic pool, and who walked into the Galactic Conclave for the first time and looked up at the ceiling once, and then did not look at it again, which was the correct instinct. They did not march. They did not arrive with any of the formal ceremony that the protocol office had offered and that Yara had declined. They walked across the hall the way you walk across a room you have been in before and expect to be in again. Yara stopped before she reached the human delegation table. She went left. She crossed to the Seer delegation section. Stopped beside Vale's seat. He looked up at her. She leaned down and said something close enough that the nearest audio monitor caught the tone, but not the words quiet, direct, brief. Vale made a small movement with 2 of his hands. Not a conclave gesture, something older and less formal than that. The kind of gesture a very old person makes when a much younger person has said something that cost them something to say. She straightened, walked back to the human table. She pulled her chair out, sat down, placed her data pad on the table, her stylus, the small flag, which she set in its holder with the same energy she had applied to picking it up 7 weeks ago, 0 extra, meaning assigned. Around her, the other 7 delegates settled into their seats. Desta placed her materials with the careful precision of someone who did not want to make noise. Marcus placed his with the ease of a man who had done this 412 times and would do it 412 more. The Grand Facilitator looked at the human table, then at his session notes, then back at the table. "This session is now in order," he said. "The first item on the agenda is the Outer Corridor Logistics Framework Revised Terms, 3rd submission, presented jointly by the Human Delegation and the Trade Oversight Body. Jointly." The archivist at the terminal in the outer wall looked up. She was not supposed to be paying attention to the session. She had actual work to do, but she looked up anyway. And her expression did the thing that faces do, when something that has been out of its place for a long time goes back to it. Yara opened her datapad. Found the document. Read the first line of the first item. The work was not interesting. It was corridor logistics routing, authorization chains, maintenance responsibility, liability frameworks. It was the kind of work that sounded important when described in summary, and was, in the actual doing of it, the same as fixing the plumbing of something very large. You had to care about it, and you had to understand it, and you had to be willing to sit in a room with Gerald for several hours while it was worked out in full detail, and none of that was exciting or triumphant, or the kind of thing that made good stories. She cared about it. She asked a question. The trade oversight representative answered. She noted the answer. Asked another question. Gerald answered this one, without a slide, in plain language, and the answer was both accurate and actually useful, which she noted without comment. The session moved. The agenda moved. Item after item, each one a small structural thing that fit into the next small structural thing. The way a building goes together, not impressive from any single angle, only when you stepped back far enough to see the shape. 4 hours in, the Heron Seer monitoring station was approved. Staffed and operational within 11 days. The Heron Junior delegate, the one who had been walking the long way around the human table every morning, signed the authorization document without drama. Yara countersigned. The document was filed. The session continued. At the 6-hour mark, Desta leaned over and passed Yara a note. Paper. Folded once. She had learned this from Marcus, who had been teaching her the useful habits of the job alongside the official ones. First session. Is it always like this? Yara looked at the note. Wrote one word below it. Passed it back. Yes. Desta looked at the word. Looked at the hall. Looked at the ceiling just once. Briefly. The way you look at something large that you are starting to understand is also ordinary. She went back to her datapad. The session ran 11 hours. At the end, the Grand Facilitator called the close. The room began to move. Chairs pushed back. The specific noise of many different kinds of beings gathering their materials, which was one of the stranger sounds in the galaxy if you stopped to think about it, and which Yara had stopped thinking about approximately 3 years into her tenure. She closed her datapad, picked up her stylus, capped it. She was pulling on her jacket when Gerald passed. He was moving toward the main exit with the rest of the Veth delegation. He slowed as he passed her. Did not stop. Did not say anything. He was moving, and then he was moving slightly less quickly, and his upper limbs shifted into a configuration she had never consciously registered before, but which she had, apparently, filed somewhere in the back of her mind over 11 years of watching him. She had asked the archivist about it that morning. Over the coffee, the supply request had finally authorized. The archivist had told her, a Veth body configuration, the upper 4 limbs, lowering and stilling while in motion. It meant approximately, the translation was imprecise times, I acknowledge you as a person whose presence changes the room. Not thanks. Not apology. Just, you are here. And it matters that you are here. Gerald moved past her toward the door. She watched him go. She picked up her bag, walked out the side door, the same one she had come in through that morning. The corridor beyond it was quiet and slightly too bright, the way station corridors always were, and it smelled like recycled air, and nothing in particular. Marcus fell into step beside her. Good session, he said. It was a session, she said. He nodded. That was the right answer. They walked toward the transit bay. The corridor was long, and the light was neutral, and somewhere behind them, the archivist was filing the day's records, and the Heron monitoring station authorization was already in the system, with an active 11-day clock on it. And the coffee supply request had finally, permanently, been closed. The chair had weight, she thought. It always had. She'd just needed 11 years and a meat pie near Waterloo to figure out who was supposed to be sitting in it. She walked. The corridor was very ordinary. That was fine.